Hey everyone, Tactics here with my sixth and final video focusing on tanks in Shadowlands with the Protection Paladin. As with my other videos, I'm going to be taking an in-depth look at how prop Paladins are shaping up on the beta, in particular their new abilities, talents, legendary effects, covenants, soulbinds, and conduit options, as well as how they're shaping up in both raids and Mythic Plus. For those interested in my other tank videos, you can check them out on my channel or linked in the description below. With that said, make sure you guys like and subscribe if you enjoy this video to be notified when I post more Warcraft content, and let's get started with the new abilities prop paladins have in Shadowlands. The biggest change for prop paladins is the return of holy power as a resource. Because of this, a lot of their abilities have seen some small tweaks. For example, Avenger's Shield no longer empowers Shield of the Righteous, instead only granting one holy power, and now Judgment buffs your next holy power spender against the target by 25%. Prop Paladins have also gained a new passive in Shining Light, causing you to gain a free Word of Glory cast every 5 Shields of the Righteous. In addition to this free cast, Word of Glory has a new passive that granted up to 250% increased healing when cast on yourself based on your missing health. Consecration has also seen a buff for Prot, now reducing damage taken by an additional 5% on top of the Mastery bonus. On top of the return of Holy Power, auras are also making a return, including Crusader Aura, Retribution Aura, Concentration Aura, and most importantly for PvE, Devotion Aura, which is now a raid-wide 3% damage reduction only provided by Paladins. Paladins have also gained a new ability in Turn Evil, which fears undead, aberrations, or demons, and they've also seen the return of Hammer of Wrath, an execute ability that can also be used during wings that deals a solid chunk of damage and generates holy power. Lastly, both Avenging Wrath and the Holy Avenger talent have been removed from the GCD, which is a nice little quality of life change for all Paladins. One of Prop Paladins' greatest strengths is their diverse and flexible talent options. Starting with the level 15 row, all 3 talents are usable in different situations. Holy Shield is the best option for magic mitigation and also deals great damage against consistent attacks. Redoubt has been reworked, now causing Shield of the Righteous to increase your strength and stamina by 2% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. This makes it the best damage option in most situations, outside of the previously mentioned consistent attacks for Holy Shield, as well as gives a decent bonus to Paladin's effective HP. Blessed Hammer saw a slight change, now reducing the next damage instance based on your attack power, but having a 6-second recharge up from 4.5 seconds. In general, it's still a nice choice for holy power generation. Next, we've got the level 25 row, where Bastion of Light has been removed thanks to holy power being back, and in its place is Moment of Glory, which is a 1.5 minute cooldown that resets the cooldown on Avenger's Shield and causes your next 3 casts of it to not trigger the cooldown and deal 20% increased damage. First Avenger was also reworked, now sort of a combination of the Soaring Shield and Bulwark of Light Azurite traits, increasing the number of targets hit by Avenger's Shield by 2, and causing it to grant you an Absorb Shield for 100% of the damage dealt. Moment of Glory is the odd man out on this row, as First Avenger is the go-to in Mythic Plus or other AoE scenarios where it adds both damage and survivability, whereas Crusader's Judgment is the best option in lower target situations. The latter 2 options also have strong synergies with different legendary effects, further increasing their desirability over Moment of Glory. The level 30 row only has a slight change to Fist of Justice, which now reduces the cooldown of Hammer of Justice based on holy power spent. This remains a great option for pumping out a ton of single target stuns. Blinding of Light also has some niche uses as a pseudo interrupt, though Prop Paladin already has some solid options on that front, which diminishes its value a bit. Repentance is still extremely niche and likely won't see much use, if any at all. From there, we have the level 35 row, which now has Unbreakable Spirit in the place of the now reworked and baseline Retribution Aura. This is now the go-to on this row, as reduced cooldowns on both your defensive abilities and utility spells is good in every situation. Cavalier remains a decent option if you need more mobility for kiting or a specific raid fight, and Blessing of Spell Warding is still niche but extremely powerful when it can be used to negate certain boss or dungeon mechanics. The level 40 row is entirely different for Prot now, housing the reworked Divine Purpose, Holy Avenger, and Seraphim talents. Divine Purpose now causes your holy power spenders to have a 15% chance to make your next spender free and deal 20% increased damage and healing. Holy Avenger is a 3-minute cooldown that triples your holy power generation for 20 seconds, and Seraphim is now a 45-second cooldown that grants you an 8% haste, crit, verse, and mastery buff for 15 seconds that costs 3 holy power to use. Unfortunately, Seraphim is the weakest option of the bunch and is not worth using over either other talent in the majority of situations. Divine Purpose is great as it lowers Paladins' mitigation downtime significantly, which has been a huge problem for them in the past. Holy Avenger lets you put out fantastic burst damage and healing, which is really strong in content like Mythic Plus if you're able to pull around the cooldown. Next up, we've got the level 45 row, where Ages of Light has been removed and replaced with Hand of the Protector, which causes your Word of Glory's increased self-healing based on missing health to apply on any target, not just yourself. In addition, Judgment of Light saw a 40% buff in the healing it provides. Again, all 3 talents on this row are usable in different situations, with Judgment of Light being solid in low target scenarios and raids, Consecrated Ground being solid go-to in Mythic Plus for kiting, and Hand of the Protector being a decent alternative for any form of content if you want to pump out stronger heals. Last up, we have the level 50 row, where Seraphim's spot has been taken by an adjusted Final Stand, which is now an area trigger that taunts all nearby targets for the 8-second duration. Sanctified Wrath is now available to Protection Paladins as well, taking the place of Last Defender, which causes Avenging Wrath to last 25% longer and cause Judgment to generate 1 additional holy power. Finally, Righteous Protector was changed slightly, now reducing the cooldown of Avenging Wrath and Guardian of Ancient Kings by 1 second per holy power spent. Final Stand is the niche choice on this row, great for specific planned use to deal with certain boss abilities or dungeon mechanics. For the most part though, the choice will be between Sanctified Wrath and Righteous Protector, which are both fantastic talents, where the latter is better if you want to pump out more Avenging Wraths and Guardian of the Ancient Kings, and the former is better if you want longer, more defensive wings. Following talents, let's look at Protection Paladin legendaries, where they have a couple solid spec-specific options, as well as some decent general Paladin options as well. The general legendary is the Magistrate's Judgment, which causes your judgment to have a 45% chance to reduce the cost of your next holy power spender by 1, which can stack 2 times, though only 1 stack is used per ability. This legendary has great synergy with the Crusader's Judgment talent, making it a very good defensive option in lower target scenarios, particularly in raids. There's also the Mad Paragon legendary, which causes Hammer of Wrath to deal 30% more damage and extend the duration of wings by 1 second. This is a legendary that provides no real defensive benefit, though it will likely be the go-to choice to pump out high single target damage. Just as the Magistrate's Judgment is best defensively in low target situations, Holy Avenger's Engraved Sigil is best in high target situations, as it causes Avenger's Shield to have a 35% chance to not trigger its cooldown when used. When combined with the First Avenger talent, this can put out a ton of self-healing from the Absorb in AoE situations, and the resets also provide a decent chunk of damage. If damage is your main focus in AoE, then Bulwark of Righteous Fury is by far the best option, which causes Avenger's Shield to increase the damage of your next Shield of the Righteous by 30% per target hit, stacking up to 5 times, as well as increasing its radius by 6 yards. In content like Mythic Plus, this deals a ton of damage, though keep in mind there is no defensive benefit to this legendary, which can make it scarier to use in higher end content compared to Holy Avenger's Engraved Sigil, which gives a smaller damage increase but also has defensive upside. Outside of these effects, the other prod-specific legendaries are a bit lacking. Reign of Endless Kings is definitely the worst of the bunch, causing you to gain Guardian of Ancient Kings for 4 seconds when dropping below 20% HP, which can only occur once per 45 seconds. In general, this just doesn't provide much offensive or defensive gain, as the uptime is extremely low even in the best case scenario. The Ardent Protector's Sanctum could have some niche uses as a cheese legendary, adding 10% damage reduction to Ardent Defender, as well as applying it to the nearest ally within 15 yards, which could potentially be used to soak otherwise lethal damage, though there are plenty of other classes that have immunities that could fulfill this role as well. When it comes to Covenants, Prot Paladins have a couple options that stand above the rest. Starting with the Kyrians, they offer the Divine Toll ability, which is a 1-minute cooldown that casts Avenger's Shield on up to 5 targets within 30 yards. This is fantastic for content like Mythic Plus, where it provides great damage, utility via its silence, as well as Snap Threat, all on a short cooldown. It also has great synergy with the First Avenger talent, adding some defensive benefit to the ability as well. In addition to this, Kyrians also provide the Phial of Serenity ability, which is quite strong for tanks as it gives them access to another health potion, as well as the ability to cleanse most debuffs, including bleeds. One of the biggest selling points of Kyrians is their strong Soulbinds, in particular Pelagos, who attaches a mastery buff to Divine Toll, adding more defensive benefit to this ability, and also providing cooldown reduction on your Phial when killing enemies, which is great for Mythic Plus. On top of this, he has a hit combo like versatility buff, which Prop Paladins shouldn't have a problem keeping at 100% uptime. Clea is also a decent choice, granting Valiant Strikes, which will grant you stacks for your and your allies' critical strikes, and cash them in to heal either yourself or a nearby ally when they fall below 50% HP. In dungeon situations, this provides some much needed self-sustain for Prop Paladins. She also grants a 10% max health shield when out of combat for 5 seconds, another solid Mythic Plus trait, as well as a 1% crit buff per nearby enemy and ally, up to a cap of 8%, which isn't terrible despite crit not being a great stat for Prop Pallies. Last up is Mechanicos, who, as I've mentioned in previous videos, is a poor option for tanks due to him affecting your control, especially in dungeons. His Summon Brawn ability has a knockback attached to it, which can be annoying if timed poorly, and he also forces the choice between a knockback on Phial or having Phial auto-trigger below 35% health, two things you likely don't want to happen as a tank. His final row is also a bit lacking, with the only decent option being for Mythic Plus in Hammer of Genesis, which gives you a stacking haste buff when first striking an enemy. Overall, Kyrian is by far the best option for Mythic Plus, and does solidly in raid fights that have some AoE as well. Having strong Soulbinds and Phial of Serenity also helps to make up for the gap in lower target situations. Next up, we've got the Necrolords, who grant the Vanquisher's Hammer ability, which is a 30-second cooldown that costs 1 holy power to deal damage and empower your next Word of Glory to automatically trigger Shield of the Righteous. Overall, this ability is lacking in general and is by far the worst option available to Protection Paladins. In addition, the general ability Fleshcraft is also lacking, especially when compared to something like the Kyrian's Phial. On top of these poor abilities, Necrolords are also a bit lacking when it comes to Soulbinds. Merilith offers small stat buffs tied to the mob type you use Fleshcraft on, though you don't often have much choice in many raid fights or dungeons, which could result in you being stuck with lower value buffs. He also provides a 15% max health absorb shield once every 30 seconds when falling below 50% health, but this just seems like a weaker version of Clea's Valiant Strikes. His final ability is Ultimate Form, which attaches CC immunity and health regeneration to Fleshcraft, as well as for 4 seconds after channeling it, which is also quite lackluster. Amini has a solid trait in Lead by Example, which adds a primary stat increase to you and your allies when using Vanquisher's Hammer. However, outside of this, her abilities are quite poor, offering a 5% health increase for 30 seconds after using Fleshcraft, as well as a short stacking haste buff on killing enemies, which is just a worse version of Mechanicos' ability. Last up is Bonesmith, who allows you to continue fighting for 10 seconds after death at 50% effectiveness, which sounds alright, but compared to a couple other death-related Soulbind abilities, it is definitely the worst of the bunch. Aside from that, he has Serrated Spalders, which is a pretty powerful Thorns-like effect that does a significant amount of damage for tanks, as well as a choice between a crit buff or a health regen after kills. In general, Necrolords have the worst ability combo for Prop Paladins, and when combined with their poor Soulbind options, it's looking to be the worst Covenant choice. From there, we have the Night Fae, who offer Paladins Blessing of the Seasons. These are 4 different individual buffs that last 30 seconds and have a 45-second cooldown. Blessing of Spring increases an ally's healing done by 10% and received by 20%, and when used turns into Blessing of Summer, which causes an ally's attacks to have a 40% chance to deal 30% additional holy damage. This then turns into Blessing of Autumn, which causes an ally's cooldowns to recover 30% faster, and from there it becomes Blessing of Winter, which causes an ally's attacks to deal bonus frost damage and debuff enemies with a 3% reduced move speed and 2% reduced attack speed, stacking 10 times. The cycle then repeats itself with Winter turning back into Spring, etc., etc. This is definitely an interesting combination of buffs, and can be solid when using the buffs on the best available target, but as a Prop Paladin in most cases this won't be a direct boost to your own throughput, which some people have a problem with. The Covenant general ability is Soul Shape, which is a 12-second move speed increase that also grants several blinks, which is a nice mobility boost for Paladins who are a bit lacking in that department. When looking at their Soulbinds, Night Fae also have some decent options. Naya causes your abilities to have a chance to grant you an overlapping max health and mastery buff, as well as causing your seasonal blessings to grant you several stacks of this effect, essentially attaching a personal defensive benefit to them. She also has the ability to reduce the cooldown of your soul shape based on kills, which will be solid in Mythic Plus to help increase your mobility for kiting. She can also attach a dot to your interrupts, which is decent in Mythic Plus, especially for prop paladins. Dreamweaver is looking like a solid raid option thanks to Pod Tender, which is a cheat death effect that requires your pod to be defended for 10 seconds to resurrect you, making it much better in raid situations where this is easier to do than in dungeon situations where you're the only tank around. On top of this, she has a couple solid stat buffs with a versatility buff that bounces between yourself and 2 allies, as well as a haste buff tied to your Blessing of Seasons, as well as an area, meaning movement could reduce the value a bit. Last up is Corrin, who provides a 10% damage and healing boost against enemies above 75% HP and allies below 35% HP. This is quite good in Mythic Plus, though for raid fights in many cases this just ends up being pad damage. The healing, however, is nice in all situations. He also has a fairly strong final row with a choice between face your foes, which causes your abilities to decrease the damage of targets you are in front of by 3%, First Strike, which grants a 25% crit buff for 5 seconds when damaging an enemy before they damage you, and Hold the Line, which causes you to take 15% less physical damage when you stand still for 5 seconds. Overall, Night Fae aren't a terrible option, granting prop paladins with a much needed mobility increase and having some interesting buff options in Blessing of the Seasons, as well as some strong Soulbind options. In most cases, however, they do tend to fall behind both the previously mentioned Kyrians, as well as our final covenant in the Venthyr. Looking at them now, the Venthyr offer the Ashen Hallow ability, which is a 4-minute cooldown that hallows an area for 30 seconds, dealing damage to enemies and healing allies, and allowing you to use 100% damage increased Hammer of Wraths on any target while within the area. This is a fantastic healing and damage boost in low target situations like in raids, as long as you can use it for a 30-second window where you can remain inside the area. Unfortunately, this caveat combined with the longer 4-minute cooldown causes this ability to struggle a bit in Mythic Plus scenarios. Door of Shadows is the Venthyr general ability, which is an alright mobility tool, but definitely lacking when compared to the Night Fae's Soul Shape. The Venthyr do have access to some powerful Soulbinds, however, starting with Nadia, who offers a large haste buff in Thrillseeker, which procs more often when killing enemies, making it better in Mythic Plus situations. She also offers a flat 20% increase to your food, flask, and weapon enchant buffs, which is great for any form of PvE content. Theotar isn't a terrible option either, granting a mastery buff about once per minute, though similar to Dreamweaver's haste buff, this is tied to an area, which can cause it to lose value if movement is needed. He also has a choice between a versatility buff for you and nearby allies tied to Ashen Hallow, or a 100 to 200% increase in combat potion length, which obviously relies a little bit on RNG for value, but can be solid when potting alongside things like Bloodlust and Prideful. Last up is Draven, who offers some of the best defensive options for tanks, with Service and Stone granting a 10% damage reduction below 40% health, which is essentially a defensive cooldown when you need it the most. This also causes you to explode on death, dealing your max health and damage and healing to nearby enemies and allies, which is a nice boost to have, but not the main benefit of this trait. On top of that, he also adds a 15% max health shield to Door of Shadows, making it useful in many more situations, and he offers the choice between a crit buff on successful interrupts, or a 10% stamina and 4% healing done buff after standing still for 4 seconds, which also persists for 6 seconds after moving, making this usable even in situations where movement is required. To conclude, the Venthyr ability is the best raid option available to prop paladins, and when combined with the strong choices of both offensive and defensive soulbinds, this makes Venthyr a solid choice, though it can struggle a bit in Mythic Plus. Moving on, let's talk Conduits, as always starting with the Covenant-specific potency options. For Kyrians, this causes Divine Toll to have a 40 to 96% chance to cast 3 extra times on the main target, which can make it a bit better in single target scenarios. Necrolords increases the damage of Vanquisher's Hammer by 20 to 48% and cause it to heal you for the damage done, adding a nice little bit of sustain, though it doesn't make them a better option. For the Night Fae, they extend the duration of Blessing of Summer, which is the chance to deal additional holy damage on your attacks, by 25 to 60%, which ends up being a 7.5 to 18 second duration increase. Finally, the Venthyr cause Ashen Hallow to strike the lowest health ally and enemy an additional time for 40 to 96% of its normal effect. Outside of their Covenant potency options, there's also Punish the Guilty, which is a solid damage boost for lower target scenarios, and also allows for better priority target damage in content like Mythic Plus. The only other potency conduit for Paladins is Vengeful Shock, which provides a decent damage boost, empowering abilities like Judgment, Shield of the Righteous, and other Avengers shields. When it comes to finesse conduits, there's a couple alright options for Paladins here. The first is Echoing Blessings, which adds a little boost during and for 8 seconds after your blessings end. This is a 5 to 12% move speed increase to Freedom, and a 5 to 12% damage reduction to Blessing of Protection and Sacrifice. Light's Barding is another decent choice, increasing Divine Steed duration by 50 to 120% for when you need some extra mobility. From there, the options are fairly lacking for PvE, with Pure Concentration adding a 20 to 48% reduction to fear effects onto Concentration Aura, and Wrench Evil increasing the range of Turn Evil by 10 yards and reducing its cast time by 40 to 96%. In terms of endurance conduits, Resolute Defender is an extremely strong option, causing Shield of the Righteous to extend Ardent Defender's duration by 20% when used while it's active, as well as causing it to reduce its cooldown by 1 to 2.4 seconds anytime it's used. This conduit gives you much better uptime on the defensive ability, which is solid in all forms of content. Golden Path and Shielding Words are both decent healing options, where Golden Path provides you with consistent healing through standing in your consecration, and Shielding Words increases your burst healing through an absorb shield attached to Word of Glory. Royal Decree provides CDR for Guardian of Ancient Kings from 15 to 36 seconds, and also causes it to make your next Word of Glory cost no holy power, which at higher ranks can be nice if you want your strong defensive up more often to deal with a specific mechanic, but in general doesn't provide a ton of value. Lastly, there's the weakest of the bunch in Divine Call, which reduces Divine Shield's cooldown by 5 seconds when you take damage once every 48 to 20 seconds. Unfortunately, there aren't many situations where you would actually need the increased number of Divine Shields that this yields, making it fairly weak. So with all that in mind, how are Paladins doing in both Raids and Mythic Plus? Starting with Raids, Paladins are in a solid position. While they don't have the same effective HP as specs like Guardian or Brewmaster, they are able to pump out a ton of damage, especially when using the Venthyr Covenant ability. They also are very flexible talent-wise, and provide a ton of utility with their Blessing, as well as the new raid buff with the reworked Devotion Aura, making having at least one Paladin in your raid very important. DKs are definitely still on top when it comes to raids, however Paladins aren't too far behind and are still a solid option. Mythic Plus is a similar story, where Paladins may not be the top tank, but there isn't much of a gap between them. Alongside Vengeance, they deal the highest damage out of any tank spec, and their strong raid utility transfers to dungeons quite well, especially things like Blessing of Protection, which can be used to cheese many dungeon mechanics, and Avenger's Shield, which drastically increases the number of interrupts available to your group, especially when using Kyrion's Divine Toll. Their self-sustain can be a bit lacking, resulting in them needing more healer attention than some other tanks, but they more than make up for this with their strong damage. In the end, Paladins are currently a strong tank in both Raids and Mythic Plus, thanks to both their strong damage output and great utility, which tend to overcome their weak self-sustain. They've gained some solid abilities in Shadowlands, with things like a raid buff in Devotion Aura, an Execute in Hammer of Wrath, and a 5% damage reduction added to Consecrate, which have helped to increase their power moving out of BFA. One of their biggest strengths is the flexibility of their talent row, which can now also be complemented by several legendaries that are strong in different situations. They also have some great Covenant choices and Soulbind options, with Kyrian for Mythic Plus and Venthyr for Raids. But that concludes my 6th and final video on the state of tanks in Shadowlands. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure you like and subscribe to be notified when I post more Warcraft content. With the release of Shadowlands less than 2 weeks away, I'm going to be revisiting how all the classes and specs are shaping up on the beta, so keep an eye out for those videos. I'll also be releasing guides to all the new Shadowlands dungeons. If you want to keep up to date with my videos, you can follow me on Twitter or check me out on Twitch, both at Tactics. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.